Okay.
Well, hello from the ITAM Kitchen. The place where we love to have some great discussion, great dialogue amongst Acid Kitchen friends, right? And today has been April Fool's. Found it's here. What can you have go a little crazy? Uh, it just continues. It's okay. Sometimes you have to embrace the suck and move it forward, which is a great theme for this month, right? We're actually continuing we had so much fun with the inherited environment that we're continuing, but we're going to take a whole different approach, a little bit different approach this month versus what we did last month, because I have two live scenarios I'm working with. It's actually coaching sessions, things like that. But here's the environment. Here's the setup. Is we have one environment. It's an insurance company, and they had ServiceNow in place. We're in operationally, and the executive said, "Nope, we're taking it out. It's coming out, and we're going to put Freshworks in its place." It's like, okay. It's all simplify plus budgets, right? And we've got some more details, but I'll just kind of give a high level part how we're moving that forward, right? Today is about the setup for the discussions for the entire month. So we're going to have different sessions. The second environment is a community bank. A community bank, similar type of scenario, but different. They currently have ShareWell. So again, another brand name, and they're taking in Freshworks. So Freshworks getting some notoriety. And by the way, Freshworks is not paying for any of this. This is just us talking about reality, to help us with our dialogue. But in that scenario, you have a lot happening, right? The CIO absolutely supports asset management. They know what it is. He's been around the block. He gets it, right? And is fully support of the effort and the individual. But even though that's the case, this individual's also inherited the CMDB. And it seems to be a very good trend on this. So we have two environments, two completely different scenarios how we got to where we are, both bringing in the same product, and both groups, both individuals need to implement the CMDB within Freshworks. It's like, how do we do this? Let's figure it out. And I said, you know what? We're going to have fun with this. And from that standpoint, and I'm saving the names, it's for confidentiality reasons, so I'm not going into the details on that. But I said, you know what? We're going to go in here and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about from the perspective, what is that next step in place? Because when we start thinking, look at the environment, sky's the limit, right? And because when you start talking about insurance and insurance things like that, you have your restrictions, right? You have regulatories, you got financial risk you're working with. In this case, insurance, it's moving because of financial reasons. So things happen, especially in the insurance world. It's insane right now. And trust me, I see it from a whole different angle as a consumer, and I see it crazy. But it's based in insurance firm. But we think about this. This individual's been asked to actually implement the CMDB. Never done it before. He's not afraid. He's a little fearful of it, but at the same time, it's like, okay, how do I move forward? That's where the coaching is coming in, right? Because when you talk about the regulations, you got SOX, data privacy, right? You've got HIPAA, you've got state regulations, how you're putting that in place, right? But you also have to say there's business as usual. In the business as usual, as we're looking at this, how do you move that forward? But before we get in more detail, I realize I just became a random runaway train. Welcome. Happy April 1st. I need to welcome the guest here. So I'm very blessed to have individuals with me. Haven't been forgotten about it. I just was a runaway train there. So Rob, Deanna, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and we'll come back to full circle and I'll ask some good questions.
I can start briefly. I'm Rob Collins. I'm an ITAM expert that's worked in IT service, for instance, service management, change management, for 30 plus years. I mean, going all the way back to when I was in the United States Marine Corps, do 2 state agencies at the state of Florida for like 24 years just for them. And then in approximately 5 years of practice as an independent, as a consultant for a major consulting firm in the US around IT asset management services. This is a particularly strong subject that I have a very strong opinion on. And so we shall engage. Over to you.
Hello. So I started my background in IT, but I also then went and got a degree in training adults. And in training adults, I realized you don't make much money as an educator. So I started going to different companies going, hey, I can train 100 people at a time. I should be able to be a manager. And so I moved myself up through service management, found IT asset management, and I never turned back. And I love the topic for today because we're pretty much in the middle of that right now, at the same scenario, but I understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Because there's multiple different flavors behind this, right? Because when you think about the environment, the scenarios, right? You have one, it's end of life product, Sharewell. It goes, I think it finally goes completely offline later this year. Avanti is bringing that offline, right? So you bring up a new technology. And the other one is ServiceNow. And we know ServiceNow, I mean, it's the gorilla we all talk about, right? It's a good product, but it is expensive.
Yeah.
And this customer raised or just said no more. It's like we're going to simplify and make it no more. And keep in mind, this was fully integrated within the environment on top of it. So it's like, oh, ouch. Okay, that hurt on the other side. So as we think about ourselves, right, in the inherent environment, the whole purpose behind that, the context is if we're going into the role, in this case, these are existing people in the role, right? You've been given this directive, this change. It's like, okay, we have our workflow, but all of a sudden there's that left turn, right? That little curveball, that right hook, whatever you want to call it. And it's like, okay, how do we address it, right? And that's what we're talking about here from the introduction perspective, because that's the important part. How do we keep our sanity in this scenario, right? I mean, just for what we know right now, what I know about, I'll start with the banking institution. This individual is doing extremely well for what it is, right? It's not perfect. It's not great. There's challenges, but all of a sudden this little shift happened. He says, okay, how am I going to do this, right? And he's been updating the Sharewell system by hand, which we all know is you try to avoid. It's not a big bank. It's one of the smaller banks, but still, even with that, trying to bring Freshworks into play, that's a new tool for him, right? Not you're fearful of tool, but he didn't get a say even to select the tool. It's just what you're inherited. And then the insurance firm, and we're going to talk about these in parallel throughout the entire month. I know it's a little bit different twist. We love opportunities to grow, right? It's literally, like I said, it's ServiceNow. And this individual is like, okay, he's already dealing with the audits. He's dealing with the software compliance activities. He has the data, has a solid program already in place. A little curveball, they said, oh, by the way, you just don't have enough to do. Now they implement the CMDB while you're at it. Okay. So what comes to mind? Rob, Deanna, what comes to mind here? Because, I mean, these are pretty significant shifts when we're talking about the program.
Deanna, you go ahead.
Especially when you have to keep BAU in mind. You can't just take off a couple of weeks and say, hey, give me a couple of weeks to do this. So the biggest one that comes to mind is, how do you get yourself up to speed with the new application? What is the new application telling you it needs to convert from the old application? Because a lot of these companies now must have some kind of a link to get back and forth. How do you import the CMDB and allowing your IT service management to still function? How much training are you getting? Are you getting weeks, months, or do you have to do it tomorrow? Those are all very important things to figure out.
Yeah, I've got a little bit different approach on this, because I've seen these system transitions between large tool sets in a few different places. My take on it is that feature selection had better have been done when they were deciding on the tool. If they haven't done it up till now, they've bought into something and they've made a commitment into a thing that they don't know anything really about, and they've only approached it at a very high level. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. Like one, right, I want a project manager as a resource set to this entire effort. We need to understand the complete scoping and the cost of what we're going to be doing. And it's a mandate at this point because you've committed. You bought the tool, and we got to move things over. Now, lift and shift operations, and especially when it comes to ServiceNow, have always been problematic. Okay, So when you're going to stand up the new tool, I think it's imperative to understand, for instance, around the CMDB, what the discovery abilities are of that program. And I would recommend hold the ServiceNow stuff to the side. We cannot ignore that, right? And we're going to need that for validation. But stand up the Freshworks discovery systems, kick those things on, and let's give that like 2 weeks time to populate a full set of what it can see, right? And then prepare for auditing between the two systems to know what it picked up, what it failed to pick up, and what's going to be needed to be moved over prior to making the complete transition and putting the new Freshservice product into production. Those are imperatives. Those are musts.
The thing I think is interesting also is I call it the simplification, right? I've got simplified back in my thing, right? It's about simplifying. I think there's also something to be said for that with an ITAM and SAM, right? Because we know this complexity can go quite crazy. And with ServiceNow, there's a lot of complexity. You can go quite complex to it if you really want to. And I've seen even more. It's like, oh my gosh, it can get pretty nutty. I mean, ServiceNow is a good tool. I'm not trying to dig into that side. It's a good tool, but it's not for everybody. So there's something else to say about simplification of this path, right? How you're looking at the data, how you're looking at your stakeholders, what you're actually tracking and managing, the data you're actually working with. There's something to be said for this type of scenario. And that's actually also what I find is very intriguing is like, okay, we have the challenge, it's management decision, but there's also a mindset that we have to work through. It's like, how do we pull back? Because in this case, the functionality between the two, and I'm not trying to product comparison, I'm trying to keep a real high level, right? So I've seen the ServiceNow, I'm familiar with it. I've seen Freshworks a little bit, and I'll just say it's a simpler portfolio, a simpler product. But what comes to mind when we talk about what do we need to simplify in this case? Because that's critical, just as we're kicking off. Deanna, any thoughts there?
And not only do we have to consider discovery, how are we putting the data in, say, for the asset management tool so that it could communicate with the discovery? Because when you change your tool like this, they have to handshake, but you also have to train all of your ITSM people. I mean, you're training all your internal people that support the business. It's not just a CMDB. It's not an isolated instance. So how much training are you giving your service providers so that they can get your users not upset with the new job? Because there's always going to be delays when you learn something new. There are always going to be people who want to do it the old way, even though they can't. Yes, you used to have a Cadillac, but now you only have a Volkswagen. What are you going to do? You still have to get to work. You still have to drive your business.
I think that's a great point. That's another one of those things that should be a mandate, is training in the new tool, because already you're handed the new tool, and the mandate is you're going to stand this up, and you want this to be successful. So I think the point especially is really strong and very good about that. If you want that full success, you need to invest in training your people. If it's train the trainer, that's okay. As long as you can get them to work together, right. Yeah, that's okay. But that has to be one of those top level considerations. Another one of those, especially around this, since we're talking about non-interrupting business or interruption as least possible, we've really got to have that alignment too. It's like there are reasons why you bought the tool beyond just cost. At least I'm assuming that there are. I need to know what those are, right? So that you can consider those when we're doing this implementation. Now, and then there's something to be said for that. We've mentioned it several times. You've got the time to do it. Do that full exercise around business objectives to IT support objectives to ITAM objectives, because this is going to tell you at the end what sort of features do you have to have in place to ensure the business operates and you continue to profit, you continue to make money in that area. Otherwise, you're spending money to do this massive effort for somebody's ego and not really for much in the way of an actual desired impact at the end. And in and around CMDB, I've really only got one more point on this, right? Whether you're using ServiceNow or you're using Freshworks, right? The three terms, the completeness, the compliance, and the correctness around it, all of those things lead to a fourth C that I like to mention, and that's confidence. If you have complete confidence in the data, the CMDB, and the product, everything else should work well. Everything should complement that.
So one of the things I would add to that with the confidence is you clean your data before you merge it with the new system. You've got to get your product as clean as you can, or else you're just carrying over major problems that you can't get a handle on. Get as much normalization as you can.
That's why
That's a great point, because
you start from scratch and you let the discovery do it, and then you audit afterwards. Because then otherwise, if you have trash in the first system, you're going to drag trash in the system. What kind of tool you have in that?
None.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Now, it's also important not to forget where you've been, right? That's where I was saying, okay, what issues did you have to date? And make sure you go through those. Even if you say, okay, to your point, Rob, we're going to start new, which I like that idea too. Make sure you understand the history and how you got to this point, right? Because if you come back to that and say, by the way, we've kind of been here before, we'll start new, that's great. But if we run these same problems, we need to resolve them. It just reaffirms those same issues exist potentially, right? It's an internal problem. Because I'm also still a strong believer that 20% tool, 80% process, right?
Yeah.
And with that, full with a tool is still a full, right? And I'm not saying these individuals are full by any stretch of the imagination, but the tool's not going to fix the overall issues that they've had, seen, and now it's a little different dynamic because they're working inside the CMDB, which as asset managers, we were around it. That's operational. We've talked about a lot over the last couple of months, right? But the reality is,
we sure have.
It's not really our forte. It's becoming our forte, but it wasn't something we asked for. And I think that's also an expectation we have with executives, that we need to set with the executives, say, really? You're going to throw this on my plate too? Do you realize what I'm already doing? And I'm not saying you're doing the remedial activities that I'll say they're promising AI is going to fix, the entry level thing. You've got that, but you still have to be strategic, right? Just food for thought for me. As you look at the bigger picture, because that's what keeps me up at night. It's like, are we thinking correctly? Are we aligned on that front? That's important.
That's a really good point. You got to kind of emphasize. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things is they have to have, Freshworks must have a suite of training for the new people to begin with. Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you give your employees enough time to read through the training? Okay, did you give them enough time to collaborate with each other going, okay, I know this department used to do it this way, but according to the new tool, you're going to have to do it a little bit differently. And that's where you want to bring up the confidence of your employees, because they are literally, for lack of a better term, having this shoved down their throats and need to get it done by Tuesday, and it's only Monday. There will never be enough time for them to feel confident no matter what you do. So at least a 3 months training when you start a new job.
I would insist on having that vendor partner and that trainer on site delivering that training across the teams, because you're not going to succeed if they don't know how to utilize the new system. So that's definitely a must. It's mandatory. Another person that I want at the table, for instance, if we're going to be working on this as a group, is I want whoever is the IT asset management team, their lead needs to be at the table. Because you're right, CMDB is not a function of asset management. However, it has become that because everybody is leaning on that, because nobody does a good job of recording and cataloging all their purchases. And so this function falls to ITSM, since that's at the forefront of incident management and request, and how you say request fulfillment. So this then becomes the new locus of that, and that's part of the issue, part of the problem. So you need to align with IT asset management and say, I don't care what tool you're using right now for IT asset management, but you need to be at this table and you need to be aware of how this functions, because I'm going to require you and your tool sets to interface with this. AMDB, IT assets and stuff, that is a full life cycle from start to finish, beginning with specification and final disposition, right? But CMDB only covers the operational life cycle of any of those CIs. That's all it does. It's what you have in play, configured and deployed, what's on it, and how people are using it, who owns it, right? And that can change with every cycle. If you change the role of this asset from a workstation to a server to whatever that role is going to be, each of those becomes a CMDB or a configuration lifecycle. It can start, it can end. If you repurpose that, right, that's a whole new internal lifecycle, and it stays within the operational lifecycle, not within the overall span of an asset lifecycle.
Because as an asset manager, like you alluded to, we only look at the CMDB as to know where our assets are when they're not on the shelf or when they're not in disposal.
Yeah, and not in the stock room.
That's right, that on the shelf stock room. Yep.
Absolutely.
So, and then how does a business learn to order? Their whole ordering process, the catalog has now changed as well. And catalogs are not that easy to spin up. It takes you a while to get all those products into your service management.
Yeah, that's specification to acquisition, the first two pieces of a life cycle for an asset.
Yes.
Anywhere. And I don't care what it is. This includes cloud assets. This includes SaaS stuff. Doesn't matter. That's the beginning.
You know, I think it's interesting because back to the point that CMDB is falling on our lap as far as asset management. And I think it's important to express why that's happening, right? And dig into that a little bit, because I think we're throwing around some assumptions in place that we haven't communicated, right? And when you think about that, for that bigger picture, what comes to mind? Well, why is the CMDB all of a sudden now being put into the asset management realm? And some in organizations have been toying this for years, but I'm seeing it more and more prevalent. And with tools like Freshdesk, it's going to become even more prevalent.
Yep. I can tell you why that is. Again, the reason why is because historically, organizations don't do a good job of managing, cataloging any of those assets that they've specified or they've picked up. Specification a lot of times falls, so like your desktop help desk support teams. Those are the folks that have been doing that. Anybody in asset management has been primarily focused on software asset management because who wants an audit letter? You know, that's why. And so for those failings in the practice, right, you have this next best thing, and that's the CMDB. And you have those discovery methods, so many of them across various different tools. That's why they said, well, if you want to do a quick inventory and we don't have time to walk space to space, heck with it. Just go look at the CMDB. That'll be enough. That's good. No worries. Of course, we know as practitioners, it's not, right? But it's the next best thing. And that's the reason why they put it into the tools. Because when you get into this and you're going to be doing any kind of management, whether it's incident management, change management, and request fulfillment, someplace within that record is going to be something that identifies the CI, right? And that CI table then is what's being relied upon. It shouldn't be the primary, but it's what is the de facto standard. That's what we've come to today.
One of the other things I found is that sometimes the CMDB people don't care about the AMDB. And the AMDB people are not trained on what the CMDB actually does. So there's a very lack of communication between the two departments.
Spot on.
So let me ask a pointed question. So I know both of you are certified by ITAM, right? I'm one of the fellows, but that's what it is. So within your training, were you even taught anything about the CMDB?
No, I was not. I've
Go ahead.
I said I actually went back through some of the records, and the CMDB is not mentioned in hardly any portions of the books, and they're quite a large number of books.
No, I was just curious because I didn't think it was either, and I knew years ago, I as one of the speakers for the ACE conference, I actually brought in the CMDB as a discussion point. I always had a full room. And I knew people were really interested in it, but I just haven't seen it evolve in that as far as those topics. So that's why I was curious in general. So being able to further advance, that's what we're all about, right? That's why we have the co-op, et cetera, to go beyond just the training. But it's important to put out there And where I was going with that is for those that have gone through the training and the certification, don't feel that you've been left in the cold. Feel that you just haven't advanced that part of the conversation yet.
Right.
Because as an industry, it's been out there. It's been out there. I mean, I've seen it, and the reason why I know about it is because I was leveraging it at Peregrine, right?
Yeah.
And I was always the integration guy. Actually, I was the integration guy for way too many years. I was always the integration guy going between Asset Center and all the other tools back even in the Peregrine days before I even became part of Peregrine or HP or doing that stuff. And I natively had to learn how it all worked. So just don't feel alone like you're left in the cold, because it's important to understand this, because you need to also understand the bigger picture, because this is where it's headed. A different organization can be differently. And there's a whole separate, we could talk about org structure, et cetera, later. But I just wanted to ask that pointed question because it's extremely important, because that's also what's happening with the vendor spin as far as to the executives. And that's why I want to bring kind of full focus here back to simplification, right? Executives are tired of hearing it's going to be a massive upgrade, or it's going to be $1 million plus to bring the service now to the current release, or it could be Sharewell. Okay, Sharewell is going into life because of Avanti, so we need to move from Avanti. Right. And you're going to move that over. Okay, that also takes money and funds, right? It's cheaper. Just bring me a new product and we're going to start from scratch. That's all the time and money they have.
And what if all your records are you don't get them electronically? You're still using spreadsheets. I mean, and the spreadsheets have to be in an exact certain order for you to upload them into the tool. Exceptions, it's not going to work.
Yeah, field mapping. We'll settle some of that. Kind of to your point, Bill, right? I'm going to be at ACES here, and I'm going to be speaking specifically to that very thing, that AMDB, CMDB confusion. I really am. I want clarification in the industry so that we as a collective can move forward clearly on that. I want the attention of the tool vendors, because they're so focused on CMDB and nothing else that they've left that behind. And then there are training and education systems out there and certification systems that also have neglected to address it. And I think it's necessary to do. We do it, and if we're successful, then we're actually going to bring that clarification to the industry as a whole and get the community to move forward in the same path, in the same direction.
And to your point, that's where actually we've been with the co-op. So the co-op was one of the reasons why I had the co-op. Asset management, software asset management, configuration management is to help marry the three. All right, because it is the trifecta on that side. I'm not trying to forget about FinOps. FinOps in there too. But FinOps is kind of going down its own path. But the other three have kind of been left behind in their own silos to a degree. Asset management, software asset management, we're usually pretty close. On that side seem to be, because it's operationally out there, it typically gets forgotten about. It's like, I'm used to going in environments where they're talking to service management teams and CMDB. It's like, okay, what's CMDB? How are you managing it? Oh, we're not. It's like, what's your role? I'm just making sure the integrations work. That's it. They don't think about data accuracy, right? They're not thinking about the attributes and how they're updating. They just want to make sure the right fields are in place. So it's more of the technical part. Well, I hate to tell everybody, but if you look at what AI is doing for the development of all these tools, the development of all that stuff, it's done. It's done. You're going to have some specific attributes, but the coding, those days are gone. AI can deal with that. So with that being gone, okay, how can we be a higher level discussion? And that's what we need to think about as we're moving forward on here. We're talking about simplification, but also higher level efforts. That's what comes to mind for me. So with all that being said, what comes to mind as far as, we've talked about a lot as far as discussion, different individuals, how we look at data. And we're going to be talking about this in depth throughout the entire month. You're going to see sessions pop up, and we've got some really good topics as we go through this. But it's at the same time for trying to figure out, okay, from a start right now, how do we keep ourselves on track? And I say I'll say independently, be selfish perspective, because that's also the important part here, is you may be on your own island at the moment, right? And all of a sudden you've gained this new skill, right? What comes to mind and say, okay, how can I how can I work through this drudgery, right? Because this is actually, it's a great opportunity. That's how I look at the bigger picture. It's a great opportunity.
Mhm.
But to get there, because I just got totally overwhelmed, and the only reason why I overwhelmed, and I just unexpectedly got overwhelmed, is I now have a lot of other things I don't know anything about, and I don't know how to proceed. So what comes to mind when you get in a scenario like that, Rob?
Yep. First and foremost, sit down with the leadership and understand what their objective is, what the ideal goal is. Next, sit down. I want a planning committee. I want that project manager assigned who's got lots of breadth of knowledge and various different kinds of project manager, skills, for instance, that they could leverage in there. And then from there, identify those stakeholders and get them to the table, do an intro meeting and say, this is what we're doing. Here's the end goal. And now we've got to make it happen. We have vendor contacts, hopefully. We've got training staff ready to go as soon as we're ready. And then we've got to be able to do this with as little impact to the business as usual as possible. And for me, those are all sort of those are the foundational things that need to be in place in order to make this a success.
Excellent.
Another area is you can ask also for third-party assistance. So maybe you're not technically up to speed on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Spend a little bit more money in the beginning to get everything right, as opposed to being really trying to save a buck, because it's not going to help you. Spend your money in the first 3 to 6 months to get yourself up to speed with the new tool. Because your technical people don't know the new tool either.
That's true. It depends upon their environment. I know the Sharewell environment usually wasn't too bad to administrate. ServiceNow, we know, I'll just call it big. It's a major effort. It's an uplift as far as an entire team on that. So that's a change of platform. That's huge, right? It's a lift and shift. And your team members, if they're at ServiceNow, I'll be honest, they're probably leaving the company.
Yeah.
They were part of the ServiceNow team because ServiceNow resources are very wanted entity out there for us to do that. So if they're not already on they're going to soon be. And to your point, Deanna, it is important to have the training. And it's also important, I would say, to say, okay, I love the management discussion. I would go a little bit further on that management discussion. What comes to mind for me is ask management how they're going to support you in this whole effort. And just be honest with them. As managers, we usually do ourselves, but we don't raise our hands often enough. Say, how can we raise our hand and say, I'm going to be challenged. I know you want to do this too. I'll take it on. That's great. But I need your support. If something messes up, you've got my back. That's what comes to mind too, because again, it's easy to get overwhelmed with this, right? So as we're moving forward, yeah, you're right. And managing scope's doing too. And the other part, sometimes we don't get the opportunity to be in the room. This is our opportunity to be in the room.
Good point.
You'll be on this one.
Yeah. You're gonna be in the room and part of the team members, and you need to step up for that and speak up. And that may not be what you're used to, but this is that opportunity to do exactly that. It's like, okay, I've got all this stuff. Tell the wife and kids, it's like, it'll be okay. We'll work through it. I'm watching the ITAM Kitchen. They're going to help me through this. There you go, as an example. Being able to say, okay, how are we going to work through this, right? And just tell the executives, I wasn't part of the decision. I'll support you. I need you to support me.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it is an opportunity for growth, and that is important. And we grow every day. I always say everything's a great day to grow. Every day is a great day to grow, right? So, and this is a great opportunity to do exactly that. To say, okay, let's make it happen. Let's move it forward, because there's a lot still to happen. Because we're still going to have our activities. We're going to have our audits come in. We're going to have our compliance reports we need to go out. That doesn't change.
Nope.
If anything, it's going to say, what comes to mind for me on that is say, okay, what's the next step? How do I optimize that? I mean, Rob, how would you optimize something like that? Well, let me ask the question versus me answering it myself.
Well, I think if you've got to start off kind of with assessing what you have, start where you are, start with what you have present, and then, if you put the proper metrics in place, for instance, you'll get that feedback over time and on progress. In this particular effort right here, that's part of the reason why you got the project manager in place and why you're communicating with stakeholders. If any reason comes up to change course in any of these activities, you run it through a group, a committee, if you will. If it's worth changing direction right now or necessary, then the decision mechanisms and the approval mechanisms are in place for that, right? The team is informed and upper management is also informed on a timely basis. And otherwise, if you stick with the scope and you do really good scope management around this, then you should be okay. As to optimization, I think optimization kind of comes as a second part to all of this, especially with the pressure to get it in place and the commitment to the investment that's been made so far. So I would agree optimization is an ideal goal, but that's tomorrow's goal and not necessarily today's.
One of the other things is make sure you spend enough time on your sandlot. Don't rush to production unless you really have a major deadline. Read it out in your non-production environment. Don't just think it's going to work out of the pan.
Oh, absolutely.
I've yet to see many of these efforts, especially with the ServiceNow, that doesn't need some kind of follow-on activity through third-party consultant to assist. It's a massive system. It's very detailed. I've operated within the ServiceNow architecture, and I like it for what it was doing for me at the time, change management, and my push and impetus to try and get proper ITAM management in place. But that was a whole different, it was an interesting and unique experience to see not only our own, at the time, effort with needing to bring in additional help, but with many different customers that I've served along the way through ITAM maturity and hearing their stories around a similar set of circumstances. Always additional third-party help was needed. It never was as simple as the first 1 or 2 years of implementation. It always followed on with additional activity. And in some cases, they're still out there trying to make certain things work. CMDB is one.
And it's also about patience too, right? You have to be patient. You put this because it is a major shift for the entire organization when something like this happens.
Yeah.
So this is not. So what we're finding out of this as we start the wrap up here, right? Sorry about being a few minutes late. It's definitely been April Fools on several different fronts on our technology. Has decided to say, okay, it wants to take a nap on us. So we'll just leave it at that. Yeah, exactly. But it's also important to say, okay, how are we looking at this, right? I'm going to go back to that. How do we keep ourselves in our own threshold? Because we also have our own decisions we have to make along the way. We're going to help and say, okay, how are we going to play? The whole idea behind this, the inherited playbook, right? So we have a role and how we're moving forward, inherited environment, that is say, okay, how are we going to bring a CMDB into the fold? But also be realized, like we talked about, just a little bit of a recap, right? Have to raise our hands, ask for help at the right time, look for the trainings, and also understand what does in training, Deanna, you brought up, actually, you and Rob both brought up, understand, okay, what does the tool provider, in this case, Freshworks, provide out of the box when it comes to process versus what you're looking at? You say, well, process really doesn't matter because we have a new tool. No, process does, because you need to know what they're thinking about out of the box, how they functionally work, because that will actually help impede how everyone works together. That's what comes to mind for me.
I like that point, because if you're new to the application, don't sit down and get yourself buried in customization right away. Do the cool out of the box. See how it works for you out of the box. Because customization, you're going to go in so many different directions, you won't have anybody who can help you.
Yeah.
And realize you will be forgotten about it. Yeah, go for it.
Let me add to that. those of you out there that are doing the same kinds of modifications, for instance, in the service, really in any tool environment, right? If you're not cataloging those changes as you get them through and you get them put into place into production, you're going to put yourselves in a terrible trouble spot whenever it comes time to upgrade, right? Unless you have help from the vendor and they can look over your catalog of changes and you see your applied new modules and workloads, right? So they can assist you with that. Often it's not. It's what you get out of the box, and then, hey, if it's customized, you guys should have learned what the product did before making all the customizations.
Exactly.
I've seen this go back and forth in terrible ways. So if you are going to modify the product, which I highly recommend you don't do as a first step, like Deanna said, learn what that product does and alignment with what it is that you need done, right? And if you can use it out of the box with no changes, please keep those uses as close to out of the box as possible, right? Unless you absolutely positively have to rename a field or create a new field, right, sir, for a serial number versus a service tag number because one person doesn't like the sound of this word versus the other.
No, you're absolutely right. And as we bring this, again, we're closing this up. You're going to have challenges. You're going to do things you've never seen before. You're going to learn about different philosophies, how integration would work. And the most important part is keeping you're stabilized. You have to be the rock through this whole process. And that's extremely critical. Is if you start adding drama to any of this, and I'll just call it out, right? It's drama. We have people that are drama. They love drama. They incorporate drama. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to point anybody out. Can we point out all to ourselves at times? You do not need to be adding drama to this. You need to actually be removing the drama. And that's important as we work through this, because when you're seen as someone who can consciously move forward with confidence, stability, and be able to communicate well, there's your advancement right there. We all try to advance, figure out where we're going. And trust me, I love asset management. I stuck around it. I still communicate pretty well, I've been told. But there you go. But if you're looking for advancement or anything like that, this is your opportunity to shine. This is it. And from mentoring peers and teaching them how data accuracy works, things like that, that comes to mind too. Because honestly, IT doesn't care to a degree. They just don't. They never have. Because, okay, we talk about reactiveness. We didn't talk about proactiveness. But think about that as you're moving forward. Because within the upcoming weeks, we have a lot of dialogue we're going to talk about. Moving data, stabilizing data. There's lots of different topics we're going to talk about. We only have 12 other episodes. So basically, was 11 more episodes, and we'll have a wrap up. So we're going to do this for the entire month. It's like, Bill, is there that much to talk about? There's plenty to talk about in this one, right? And we're going to be talking about from that standpoint to actually provide that visibility, because whether it's Freshworks or some other tool, when you start doing a platform change out, it's important. In this case, it's from a large application, large, right, to a smaller, which is Freshworks, right? How do you do that? I'll give an example. Sharewell. Why was Sharewell created? You guys know that? You know why Sharewell was developed?
Well, no, it's a ticket management system. It's an incident management system.
Correct. It's a full ITSM system. But what was the, I guess I've been in the industry too long. What was the context of why Sharewell was created? It had a pretty good user base at one point, actually. Any thoughts?
Trying to get off of it now.
So Sharewell was created because those that went to ServiceNow did not want to pay for ServiceNow. They could pay for Sharewell and have similar functionality without all the costs.
Okay, so a low-cost alternative than the ServiceNow.
That's how it started.
They're becoming
they used to have their own user group sessions, etc. And then they had some leadership issues, and they were purchased by Avanti. I'm not saying I was wrong, but you move on, right?
Acquired.
But that's how Sharewell was created. This exact scenario is why Sharewell was created. As far as when ServiceNow, okay, look for your alternatives. So it's not the first organization or first time we've ever heard this come from another from an executives. We just don't hear about it often enough, right? So thank you, Rob. Thank you, Deanna. This has been great. A great kickoff for an entire month. It's been a little crazy as far as the day, but we made it happen. We're there. We delivered on that side. Appreciate all the contributions. I saw Don Champlin's out there. Hey, Don, I'm glad to see you out there. Do something like that. Got some great topics that came up about alignment, italics, things like that. And that's another point is you also need to figure out where the organization is for process in general, because if your help desk and service desk isn't focused from a process side, at least give them the basics. Do the lean version, if nothing else, as far as make sure everyone's on the same page. But thank you very much. Thanks, Deanna. Thanks, Rob. And we're going to wrap it up for today. We'll continue on time, on target, on Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we'll make it happen. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate the contributions, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.